Hello everyone, welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today I want to talk about something very simple, but is underutilized not only in Rapier, but in the longsword. But Rapier I feel like is the better means of demonstrating this concept. And that concept is thrusting in opposition as a response to a thrust by winding. I know that sounds very complicated, but it's very, very simple. So first we'll just watch what happens. And on the offset, it looks extremely simple. It looks like we both just stab at each other and one person happens to land. But there's a couple of mechanics at play here. The first thing to pay attention to is that my opponent begins to lunge first. This is an important thing to understand because this particular method of landing a thrust is not defensive in nature, but a response. When you see someone come with their thrust and you see them pull their tip up from beneath, especially one that, as you can kind of see here, is pointed a little bit to the left side of the fencer, my right side, what you have to think about is that you're thrusting along a line and you're doing two things simultaneously. You are pointing your tip towards the closest target that you can possibly reach and turning your hand into where that thrust is coming from in order to box out the opening that it's trying to get to. So at the very beginning of this thrust from my opponent, they're raising their tip up and they're very clearly going for my right shoulder. That's the classic place that most thrusts go to because the right shoulder, besides the stuff that's protected by the handguard, is the closest target that you can reasonably hit. If he was trying to stab me in the arm, there wouldn't really be anything to stab because my bell guard is reasonably protecting all of that. So pretty much right above the right bicep up to the shoulder, that's the sweet spot that you're going for. But in order to interrupt this, I lunge second, and you can't really tell because of the footage, but I go from having my quillions directly straight up and down in third position, I believe it's mostly called, and rotating them off to the side in second position. And basically that 90-degree rotation from the quillions being directly up and down to directly side to side is what boxes out this point and makes me completely safe. It's the only reason that in the process of doing this, I did not get stabbed at the exact same time. At the same time as this happens, I land my thrust right in the spot that I was talking about, right about the right shoulder. And then most importantly, when I follow it up, I rotate up into first position. And really the reason I do that is because as soon as the tip makes contact, my sword bends up. So naturally my hand is sort of being forced up a little bit just by the tension in the blade. But more importantly, that's where my opponent's sword goes. By following my opponent's sword with my guard, essentially the buckler that's been welded onto the end of my sword, I can protect myself from the follow-up because theoretically, if I had stayed all the way down here and my opponent's sword was up here in the air, he could just throw that cut right back down onto my head. You know, a stab through the shoulder isn't exactly going to kill anybody instantly. So you always have to look out for those after blows, you know, from a martial and just a tournament perspective. Now, where this comes into play with longsword is a little bit more complicated because there are two arms. But I'm going to have a different clip for that. So here is the second clip. Now what we're going to see is a similar sort of setup. You're going to see one fencer attempt to lunge and land a stab, and another fencer wind out that initial thrust with their own counter thrust and land. Now what's important to look at here is the positions that both fencers start in and their similarities and differences. So what we can see here is similar to the rapier example. One fencer starts their lunge first. They start it with their blade relatively in a low position, though it gets even lower as the thrust is going. And they're sort of rising their tip up into the target, which in this case is either the shoulder, neck, face, whatever. After the fencer on the left begins their lunge, the fencer on the right begins their lunge. Only instead of simply driving their tip forward and likely impaling each other, the fencer on the right throws a little bit of a Zorn Ort, maybe arguably a flat Shielhau as well. But the point here is that what this motion does is the exact same thing as what the motion of the rotating of the quillions did in the previous example. By coming in and putting that positive pressure on the blade, strong to strong, with that momentum from the right to the left, it pushes the opponent's blade up and out of the way over the left shoulder, keeping them safe. The other key thing here to point out is that the second this contact is made, the point is driven directly into the closest target. Now, with Rapier, there's only one shoulder that's pointed forward, generally the dominant shoulder. In longsword, hips have to be a little bit more square and shoulders have to be a little bit more square. So the closest target, I would say, is really anything between the shoulders. If you manage to land on the dominant side shoulder, that is still arguably the closest target, but it's generally not more than an inch further ahead than even the left shoulder. So anywhere in that range is usually best. Now, the success of this as a response, namely something that where you think your opponent is going to thrust and you want to do something about it while delivering a thrust of your own, each methodology of keeping yourself safe is going to be different per weapon, but they're all going to basically succeed based on the same body mechanics. And those body mechanics are zoning out the area where you are most likely to get hit, aka either the dominant shoulder or the dominant shoulder line, pushing the sword out of the way with the part of your blade closest to your hands, aka the strong in the case of longsword, and putting that tip directly on target with the closest target, aka with your weak. If you do all three of those things, you will be able to simultaneously put your opponent's thrust out of the way and deliver one of your own. All right, that's going to be it for today. If you'd like to see your own footage featured on the channel, feel free to give me an email at HEMAFightBreakdowns@gmail.com, and I hope to see you next time.